The other day, Bishop, we were talking about an article that you had sent me by a man named John Stossel, and in the article it was talking about college education and how in our common culture, a lot of times it's kind of foisted upon young people that you have to do it or that you need to do it. And when I read the article, some of the biggest things that popped out to me is what I want to talk to you today about and
Okay.
kind of get your feedback on it. But one of the things was, I see it quite often, and we hear it with people a lot of times. It's not that people care about what college you go to. It's not that people care about how much money you spend or what you studied sometimes, but it's a lot of times that diploma, just saying that you went to college and you got a 4-year degree, is a signaling device sometimes, showing that you completed something, showing that you were tenured in doing something. You actually started it and you finished it. And that's where people are looking at a whole lot more sometimes, and not necessarily looking at it and saying, well, where you accomplished this and you got this certain degree in a certain area that I need you in, but they looking at it, and they're looking at it in a sense of a signaling device. And we were going to talk about a few other things, but let's just start off at that, kind of talking about how college diplomas sometimes are not really used in the sense of saying that the degree taught them something, but it's something that signals to people more or less.
Well, Brother Devin, the statistics are there for to be found and to be ascertained. You can find these statistics in a lot of different places. First thing I would like to say with regard to our LifeWorks Ministries is we don't want to give anybody at any time and juncture the idea that there's anything anti-intellectual or anti-education about our stance about things,
Yes,
because
sir.
I believe that it's very, very important to always be learning. And I think that always learning something and always keeping something in the forefront of your mind that you're studying, trying to learn, it's a proven fact that when a person keeps their mind engaged in the process of learning, it keeps their mind sharper and keeps them able to produce better in any field of their life. But I think what we're probably seeing that the article that you made reference to was basically trying to point out was that oftentimes it is just that. It's a signaling device, and for instance, let me just give you an example of something. Uh, Anecdotal evidence, but yet something that I know personal firsthand. Young man, a bright young man, talented, gifted young man, skilled young man. Uh, Went to college. His degree was in history and literature,
Mm-hmm.
and when he got out of college, he found a job, but that specific uh, uh, field of study that he was in, he didn't use it in one iota. He
Yeah.
went into he went into a field of academic, or into a field of putting his college degree to use that had nothing to do with literature and history. I think he wound up working in finance somewhere. So that tells me that the people that were looking to hire were not necessarily looking for someone that was skilled and trained in a field of expertise, job specific.
Yeah.
They were seeing it as a signaling device, and that person was college educated. Well, the truth of the matter is, you can get all of the knowledge that's available without necessarily having a prescribed course of study and having a diploma or a certificate at the end of it.
Yeah.
Uh,
A lot of jobs do that when you're hired on anyhow.
that's right.
They train you
They
to
train
fit
you.
the job.
They train you job specific, and I think what our society is seeing is that we're seeing a lot of people wind up with degrees, and I'm not saying they're worthless or they're useless. I'm just saying that they're not producing for those people the results that they anticipated. That specific article that you were talking about, if I remember correctly, I'm just pulling this from memory because it's been a few days since I actually read it. But the writer in this specific article, in this opinion piece, said that many people get out of school and the evidence. I don't know if it's scientific. I don't know if it's empirical evidence. Maybe it's just anecdotal evidence. But the surveys that they ran on people oftentimes said that when they got out of school, they actually couldn't cite one thing that they knew
Yeah.
that they didn't already
Cite
know.
hardly nothing. that
They could cite barely anything. Well, when you couple that with the fact that the price of schooling is going up drastically, and that many people, when they get out the other end of a 4-year degree, they're sometimes $100,000 plus in debt.
Yeah.
And so, and there again, I don't want to sound anti-educational or unenlightened. I went to university myself in my younger days, and some of the things that I studied and some of the courses that I took at university turned out to be very beneficial to me. What I see is that there are people that get a 4-year degree, or they get a associate's degree in something, but it's so esoteric in what you really studied. At the risk of sounding misogynistic or something like that, why would you want to go to college 4 years and have a degree when you got through in feminist studies or something like that? What can, the practical question that we need to ask ourselves in a society that's in transition, in my estimation, is, now, if I'm going to get a degree, I would need to, I would think it would behoove me to get a degree in some sort of hard sciences like engineering, mathematics,
That's right.
physics, something that had an application in a pure and applied science sort of way. Many people, I know when I was in college, and I was in university, I met many people that were that they were enrolled in college, and they said, well, what are you studying? They said, well, I'm studying general studies because I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah.
Well, you only have a short period of time before you have to make a decision about that, and I just think that sometimes statistically, it's been proven that college does not necessarily enhance a lot of people's earning capacity, and they're 4 years out and $100,000 in debt.
They start off in the hole.
They start off in the hole, and the truth of the matter is, there are a lot of things going on in America, especially in the climate that we're in right now, politically and economically, that would tell us that there is a resurgence. I know this probably goes in the face of what a lot of people believe and see, but I've done a little bit of digging and a little bit of research and study into it, and there are a lot of jobs out there, but they're jobs for people who want to employ themselves in some blue-collar fashion, in a trade or a craft. I guess the old-fashioned way of saying it was that if a person doesn't mind picking up their tools, turning wrenches, or doing something in the crafts and the trades, that there's still a lot of economic opportunity for people. And
That's right.
There's still a lot of opportunity for people to explore entrepreneurialism and build their own businesses and find their own niche markets. And sometimes the studies that we see that are being offered, and sometimes the degrees. And that's not me saying that. That's people that have been through the system, get out on the other side, and they say, now,
Yeah, we're hearing this for the first time, because for the first time, everybody's being told you've got to go to college to make it.
we are seeing an emergence.
That's right.
Of a whole echelon of society that says, I did what society told me I should do, and
That's right.
and I was molded into this. But when I get on the other side, I still don't feel like I'm qualified or equipped, and I don't feel like I found the niche for
That's
my
right.
life. I hadn't found a way to put this to use.
Well, the beginning of that op-ed piece, that piece where we're going back to many times, was saying that the government systems that be say that you have to go to college to make it in this thing. And another piece of quote that was in here, it says that the man gave an example. He said that you just raise the bar and imagine that you was at a concert, and if you were to be there and you were wanting to see something better at a concert, you would stand up. And he said, but if everybody in the whole concert stands up, then he says you haven't got a better sight, then you're blocking each other's view now.
You don't have a vantage point anymore.
And his point being was that you're raising that bar. It used to be a higher education level, and now it's just a standard education level where if people used to not get their high school diplomas, getting your high school, and now it's the college thing. And you alluded to it a while ago, talking about the government system, giving you, because they're doing that on unsecured student loans, and nobody, and Dave Ramsey talks about this, he says nobody in their right mind in any bank would give a college student with no job, with no experience, and none of these things, $100,000 loan for social sciences or for gender studies or something like that where they couldn't work it. Yeah. Now, if you're going to be a doctor, if you're going to be a business owner, if you're going to be an accountant or an engineer, something that's proven. And that's not, saying that there aren't a few people who might be able to make money in some of those specific studies, but statistically saying, they don't give you jobs, they don't give you bank loans at a local bank if you haven't proven yourself or showed your tenure or have some kind of standing record with those things. And the point being was that, a lot of times we're doing that in the sense of trying to have that like we said at the first point, have that piece of paper, but everybody's raising that bar now, and everybody's doing that, so to speak, and kind of wondering where the end result to something like that is. Yeah. Sometimes along with the student loan crisis, because they're getting to a place with financial situations too on top of all of this also.
Well, the student loan situation in America is drastically affecting the economy.
It's a crisis.
It's a crisis stage, and it's sort of a hidden thing, because it's not the sort of thing that you could go to a Wall Street and see the Dow Jones indexes and see all of these things. That's right. But yet these things are still piling up a lot of personal debt that our society collectively owes. And there again, I want to really emphasize, who would want to go to a surgeon and who got his,
who didn't go to college,
who got his degree from Joe's surgical school or something like that. You would want certain degrees that have to have,
that's right,
skilled expertise, quantitatively assessed in that person. You would want to know that person, who would want to drive an automobile designed by an engineer that didn't know about safety and about
hadn't been tested,
who hadn't been tested, or who would want to work in a high rise that was built by someone without that had no engineering skills and trades. Right. So to say that there's not areas in our society where that's absolutely necessary,
need higher education.
It definitely is. It's an absolute. But many of the things that in the schools of liberal arts that are being offered for degrees are just not able, because when they get out on the other end, there's just not a job market for many of the things that you're trained to do. One time when I was in university, I thought of a little anecdote there that you might find interesting. I had a professor, and he was teaching history, and we were talking about the history of Western civilization, and that was the class, and it was interesting, and he was a nice guy. And one night, this was many, many years ago when I was still a teenager, I went to the movies one night, and when I walked in the theater, he was the usher there. And we talked and chatted a little bit, and he told me, he said, I got a degree, and he named the degree that he had. He said, and with that degree, he said, I'm qualified to either teach or be an usher at the local theater. Yeah. So, what he was saying was, there isn't, outside of academia, there was no practical application for what he had gotten his degree. And so he was very constrained and restricted in what he had prepared himself
right.
for his life work to do. He was very restricted in how that could be put into practice because of what the degree qualified him to do. I think that a lot of times business owners and people that are looking to make hires out of the college graduates of our society and culture, a lot of times what they're banking on is not necessarily the specific thing that they have learned, but that if they got a good college education, just even at high school and any education is supposed to be geared toward teaching us to develop the skills as to how to think and not
How
what
to
to
learn
think,
too, yeah.
how to learn and how to take learning skills and appropriate those skills and the old saying when I was growing up was that school was not supposed to teach me what to think; it was supposed to teach me how to think.
That's right.
And I believe to the end that it does that it's still very, very valuable. But I think that sometimes that if we were to go back, especially a man at my age were to go back and visit middle school nowadays, I probably wouldn't recognize what's going on there this day and time as compared to what it was with us, because we were drilled, we were with the rote of just the drill. Here's the information, study it, learn it, repeat it, study it, learn it, repeat it, test upon it. And people, I remember as a young boy, people would be sitting in the classroom and saying, well, what am I ever going to do with this information? Well, that's not the point. The point was that you were training your mind in a process of how to think,
method of how to think,
how to assess problems, how to appropriate problem-solving skills and appropriate those skills. And if our education doesn't do that for us, then it has not really educated us. And when you talk and when you see the surveys and you talk to the people that are actually part of that socio-economic strata or that sociological echelon of society, the millennial generation that's getting out of school now, and they tell you that they can't cite anything significantly that they specifically learned. Well, you have to question the value of that.
What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, and especially when it costs so much to do it.
Well, that's something else that I have written down as a note, because from the times several years back to this day and time now, number one, you can spell out a number like $100,000 easily and say that that's a general amount, but they can go up into the lot larger numbers than that. But whenever you think about the fact that that college diplomas are raising at a rate in this piece, it talks about it, and I've heard it from other people before even, that they're raising at a rate of triple the amount of inflation, of standard inflation in America. Now, how do you subsidize that? The reason why is that, and the reason why that's a big scare and a big worry is because the government subsidizes that. The government pays for that. Taxpayers pay for a lot of that stuff. And I guess it's not really the biggest thing that we want to get into is that the taxpayers take care of something like that, but because they're raising those rates so drastically and so quickly that you can't even keep up with that in the standard economy. Even if you got a job in those fields, if it's raising at a rate of triple the rate of inflation, of standard inflation,
that's right.
There's no way for you to keep up with that to actually be able to pay for that even. Which goes back to other issues we could probably cover another day with getting loans from governments and things.
We've tossed around the figure of $100,000. From $100,000 would
that's
probably,
an easy 4-year degree.
That would probably be a mid-level university somewhere. That would not be a prestigious. That would not be
Harvard or Yale.
That would not be an Ivy League type education, and it would not be a specialized education that required any kind of specialized school or training or more than 4 years.
Yeah.
So $100,000 would probably be.
And we're not talking about community colleges, and we're talking about the colleges that people think about going to state universities, out of state, traveling.
Yeah.
Because that's the idea of that's the generality that people are normally thinking of when you talk about college
I think the rule of thumb is anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 a year.
first semester?
Yeah, for the entire year when you factor in housing and so forth like that, and all of the things,
Food vouchers
all of the
and-
ancillary
yeah.
things that go along with it. Well, if you do that for 4 years and it was just $25,000, that's $100,000. Well, if you were to go out into the workforce, the first $100,000 that you made, theoretically, would be to cover the debt,
That's not covering your bills.
and that's not covering
Your other
the fact
bills.
that you would have ongoing expenses that you would be incurring along the way, and it also doesn't factor in the idea that if you're 4 years behind the curve for being in the workforce
Or interest on that debt.
by that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there again, I think that there are some fields of study that are absolutely essential, and I don't think that there'd be a thing wrong with it. But I think that I think that oftentimes people see this as some sort of panacea, that if I get this is going to fix everything for me, and that therein, in my estimation, is the biggest difficulty with it. Is oftentimes people go through the steps to do this, thinking that this is a panacea that's going to fix everything, and that if I just get this, then there'll just magically be this
Job waiting for me on the other
job
side.
and this higher quality of life and this greater earned capacity. And the statistics just don't bear that to be out. I think it needs to be scrutinized and thought out. I think it needs to be contemplated and thought out in a thoughtful way for a person to do that. Now, if a person wants to be a professional, of course, they would need that education. But Brother Devin, there's something else, and here again, I don't want to sound like that I'm trying to speak anti-education, but there has to be someone in a society to do the trade, skills, and crafts.
Mm-hmm.
You can't call your optometrist to fix your toilet,
That's right.
because even if he would come, he probably
wouldn't know
doesn't
what to
have
do.
the skill sets to know what to do.
Yeah.
A skilled craftsman that when homes are built, or someone has to construct all of those things. The pipelines that carry the natural resources across America.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go and find people with 4-year degrees. You find people with vocational technical degrees. So what I guess my takeaway from the conversation here tonight would be this: there's nothing wrong with that, with a 4-year degree, if you know specifically what you intend to do with that degree. But by the same token, we don't want to minimalize or speak detrimentally about someone who goes into the workforce and says, I'm going to be a craftsman, a tradesman, and I'm going to have a set of skill sets where I use my mind, my dexterity, my hands, my natural propensity for things, and becomes a skilled craftsman, welder, plumber, electrician, auto mechanic. All of those things, because as long as there is a culture like we live in, those things are going to have to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the takeaway for me is that if a person says, well, no, I don't think that's for me, then I think that's a legitimate assessment of things for that specific person, if they truly feel that way.
Well, I've talked to a lot of younger people before, because I can, I relate to them a lot. And me and my wife being business owners and doing what we do, I never went to college. But if I was to go to college now, I would probably retain more and take more away from that now, because knowing what I know
definitely you would.
and using what I'm using.
I can assure you that.
Yeah, and that's what I tell young people all the time. I say, well, what are you going to go for? And most times they say, well, I don't know. And then I say, well, what are you going to, and then if they do name something, I say, well, what are you going to use in the real world? How are you going to use that? How are you going to use this degree? And what are you going to do with it? And where are you going to get the job to apply it?
Yeah.
And all these things, I start asking them questions about those things, and they don't know anything about it at all. I'm like, well, go find a job close to that field, work in it, see if you like it before you go, sink yourself into something like that. Because I know guys who got 4-year degrees before, because when I used to work in the oil field, and they'd come back from those degrees and they'd work derricks in the oil field because they could make more money doing that, and they enjoyed it just as much. And then they told me, they said, well, I want to go back to college to go get an engineering degree and petroleum engineering,
so that I can work in
because
this
they could
field.
work that easier than the guys who just went fresh out of high school and passed those grades and then really have a foot in the door and really be able to accomplish something with something to that nature. And that's where I see a problem with some of those things, with people jumping right into schooling and right into doing some of that, doing the higher education at least. Not that I find anything wrong with it at all. I've seen people who done it and did a great job. But
it's nothing intrinsically wrong with a higher education. But you made a point, though. You said that from your perspective now, that if you were to go to school, you would get more out of it, and you would appropriate more of it. But that's because your entrepreneurial perspective has equipped you to have an inquisitive mind, a problem-solving mind, and now, because you're running your own business, you see the practical purposes behind it. I know that
you understand them in application better.
You know them in practical application, and you know why you would want to learn. I heard a very famous man say one time, I'll just say who it was. It was Rush Limbaugh.
Mm-hmm.
Rush Limbaugh said he hated school, but he loved learning.
Yeah.
And he found something that was a passion for his life. And the estimates are that Rush Limbaugh is worth around $500 million, and that's a figure I didn't pull that out of my off the top of my head. That's a figure that's out there, that he's worth around $500 million. But he started out at 16, knew he loved radio. Yeah. And knew he wanted to be in radio, and never wanted to do anything else but radio, actually. Yeah. And he struggled with it, but he never. But he said, I never liked school. I never did like necessarily the disciplines in the classroom setting. He said, I didn't like school, but I liked to learn. Well, I understand that. Mm-hmm. Because I still to today, I read extensively, and I've been away from the college age. If there is a typical college age, but I mean fresh out of high school, that's 40, 50 years in my past now.
Yeah.
And so, but I still every day I try to read and find things to learn and to study and to understand, because the joy of it to me is not so that I can say, well, I've got this degree, or I've got this piece of paper says I know this. The joy is that I know it. That's and right. The satisfaction and the pleasure that I get out of it is knowing it. And there's no such thing as learning something that can't be beneficial to you. If it does nothing else, it just keeps your mind in a discipline of intellectual study. I still to this day study 1 to 2 hours every day in my specific vocation, and then after that I probably read 2 or 3 hours every day.
Constantly learning. So I listen.
Constantly trying to learn.
For my job, I don't get to read as much, but I do listen to things constantly, or I read, at nighttime or in the early morning, and things of that nature. But and I was telling the lady who actually taught me the most of my later years in school, told us that I've learned more after school probably than I ever do remember in school, because it got more specific and it got more honed and more narrowed in, and the application, like I said, going back to that, actually learning things that would go towards something I could actually apply them with, is where it's stuck at. And going back to reteaching those things to other people and talking about those things with other people and having discussions about them just sets it even more so in your life. I just, I see a, and maybe that's something we can talk about in another episode, but I see a serious issue with our nation pushing that as a standard baseline whenever they're also the people who are raising the prices up on the college education and providing
it drives the cost up when there's a great demand for something. The price automatically goes up.
And they're also providing all of the loans and everything else behind all that, and I just find it kind of I'm leery of something to that nature. Well, and that's where one of my biggest issues behind that is economically too. So
there are certainly ramifications at the national economic level that you're talking about. But as LifeWorks Ministries, and that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to bring something to people through this blog that would help their lives to work. And here again, I would emphasize certainly that we are certainly not anti higher education by any means, but you can be satisfied with your life without having to saddle yourselves with skill sets that you can't use and debt that you can't pay off in the process. And the whole purpose of us developing this series that we're doing called LifeWorks Ministries is because we want to offer people counsel and advice about what can work for their lives. And there will always be a place for a man that has the practical trade skills and crafts to put those things to work in a society, because there always has to be roads built, there always has to be machines operated, there always has to be things to be constructed and built, and the engineers can design them, but somewhere the tradesmen are the people that put those things together. And we don't want people. My counsel to people is I don't want people to feel like that there's something subpar about deciding, hey, I'm going to take what I know and my ability to learn, and I'm going to learn myself a set of skills and a set of crafts skills, trade skills, and put those things to work. Now, either one of those are perfectly good, but what I guess I'm trying to say is what we are hoping for and what we're wanting is for people to find something that works for them, and they don't need to necessarily be pressured by society to meet a certain template
and be behind the curve in doing it.
And be behind the curve, and at the end of the day, 4 years, 5 years out, realizing that it was a mistake that will be quite an obstacle to overcome.
That's right.
Yeah.